tutorial, we're going to colorize a black and white photo of Marilyn Monroe. This is the photo we're going to be using. It's not a very high quality photo, so we are going to make some adjustments to the black and white photo before we actually start the colorization. First thing we want to do is take a copy of the original. You can do that by either hitting Control-I or just using the Layers panel and dragging it down and creating a second layer. The only adjustment we're going to make to the layer directly will be we're going to desaturate it. Basically, we just want to make it a better black and white. Even though this looks black and white, we can probably get it more contrasty. So I'm going to use adjustments and desaturate. There are several ways to do this. This is just one of them. Once we desaturate this layer, we are going to make a copy of this layer also. So now we have two images or two layers of the enhanced image. The original is still on our project. Now what we're going to do is we're going to try to smooth out some of the areas of her face, and we're going to do that by using some blur tools. Go up to your filter, drop down in the menu, go to blur, and then pick Gaussian Blur, and move your slider back and forth while looking at the image to see if how we can create a better or a smoother image just by changing this radius of pixels. So concentrate on the chin, the cheek, the nose, the forehead, and come to a number that kind of looks okay. And I'm just going to go to 3, and you can see it's actually smoother than the original. Here's what the original looked like. Here's what it looks like with the blur. But for Gaussian Blur, just take the number, do not hit OK, hit cancel. We're going to use that 3 on the next step. Next step is go back to the filter drop down. This time go to Other, select High Pass, and then put that number 3, which is already defaulted here, into the High Pass window here. So we'll hit OK, and then again go back up to the filter drop down, go to Blur, but this time use Surface Blur, and enter a third of the amount that you just put in for the high pass. We just put in 3, so we're going to put in 1 here. Okay, and you can leave threshold at 15. So I'll just hit OK. Next step is we want to invert this layer, so hit Control-I, and we'll invert the layer. And since we can't really see too well at the normal blending mode, we're going to change it to linear light, and now you can see the image. It's fairly blurry, so what we're going to do is just take down the opacity a bit, and again concentrate on the chin, the cheeks, the nose, forehead, and try to come to a number that kind of highlights the skin as far as making it look more smooth. So I'm just going to go right down the middle at 50%, and then we'll work from here. So we're not going to use the filtered image throughout the whole picture. We only really want to use it on the skin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask onto this filtered layer, and it defaults to white, which means it's going to show all of the filtering through, or if you had a color there, it would show it through. White shows it, shows the image, or I should say the filter or the color through. Black doesn't show any. So just because we don't want to show it all, I'm going to actually invert this layer mask by hitting Control-I and show none of the filter through at this particular time. So now what we want to do is we want to paint that filter image onto the original. So I'm just going to zoom in here a little bit and show you what I mean. So I'm going to select my paintbrush and make sure that your color defaults to white. White will actually start showing the filter or the color through on the layer. Black will take it away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start painting around areas of her skin. Now I'm staying away from the more defined edges. For instance, her eyes, her lips, the nose. Stay away from the defined edges, as that'll make it look a little blurry. The only exception I'm going to make here is that the chin and neck area is not well defined, so I'm just going to paint through that. And as you can see, as I'm doing this, the filtering that we did earlier with the blur tools is starting to just get painted on the original, but we're keeping some of the other items of the photo as is. So as we go around the nose, again, stay away from the defined areas, the edges of the nose. So I'm painting on the outside of the nose, I'm painting on the inside of the nose, but I'm staying away from the actual edge. So we'll do it on this side also, inside of the nose, outside of the nose. And when I pull back out later, you'll see, why this is really important that we stay away from these defined areas. So I'm just going to continue painting around. I'm going to stay away from her birthmark here, and I'm just going to pull out just to show you what we're doing. So as you can see over here in the lower left-hand part of the, or right-hand part of her face, it's starting to look better using the filter that we made. Over here on the upper right side here, it's still a little rough, so that's what we're going to continue to do. And I'm just going to show you very quickly why I'm not using this filter on some of these defined areas. So I'm just going to paint on her lips and teeth, and as you can see, it blurs it out, and we don't necessarily need to see it that blurry. So that's why we stay away from the defined areas. I'm just going to back off that and continue here. I'm just going to move along, like I said, a little quickly because we have a lot to cover in this tutorial. I'm going to stay away from the black area underneath her eye, although I am going to go right under her eye with the filter that we created. Same thing on the other side. I'm going to stay away from the black area. But what I am going to do is I'm going to do her eyelid, but again, staying away from defined area of the eyelid, so we don't go over those well-defined areas. Same thing here below the eyebrow, and let's do the other side real quick, staying away from the edge right over the eyelid and staying away from the edge just below the eyebrow. So I'm just going to move up. We're almost done here, although we didn't do the ear. The ear, again, I'm just going to do the same thing, just not go over the well-defined edges of the ear. Okay, let's move up to the forehead, moving across. I like to go perpendicular against the hairline, since hairlines aren't usually absolutely straight. So there we go. So I'll back off, and you can see this is the image with the filter applied just to the skin tone areas, and here's what it looked like before, and here's what it looked like after. So it's a little bit smoother, and I think we're set up fairly well to do some coloring right now. What I'm also going to do before I start is combine these two layers, the filter layer and the copy of the desaturated layer. I'm just going to highlight them. Just hit Shift and click, or Control and click, just to highlight these two layers, and then just hit Control E, and that'll combine the layers. So now we are ready to start our colorization. We're going to start the colorization with the face, the skin area, and what I like to do is use the quick selection tool. There are many ways to highlight areas in Photoshop. This is the one I like to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start at the top of her forehead and kind of paint down, and see if Photoshop can help me try to find the edges. Now this is not the best picture, as I said earlier, so it's having a little bit of a rough time finding the edges. The quick selection tool, the way I have it set up defaults to an additive process. You see the plus sign in the center there? That means every time I click, it's going to try to add to the selection. If you hold the Alt key down, you can quickly do a delete, and that will take away from your selection. But whether you go over or under your edges here, no worries. You can always correct it later. So make your selection as quickly as you can, and then we can adjust it later. If you want to see what you've selected a little bit more clear, you can hit the Q key, which is the quick mask key, and it'll just show you what you have selected. Q again will get you back. So let's see what we can do here with this selection. Now, once you have something selected, you're going to add an adjustment layer. An adjustment layer is a layer that goes on top of the base layer. This is a non-destructive process, so whatever you do won't affect the original image, except for the one thing we did earlier, which was to desaturate. Although we do have a copy of the absolute original also. So come down in the layers panel, click on adjustment layer, and then you have a series of blending methods or modes to apply to the selection. I like to use solid color, and then for skin, it's usually a combination of a brown, a red, maybe even a blue. You have to combine them together to get a good-looking skin tone. It takes a little bit of time sometimes, but with a little practice, you get better at it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a brown layer. I'm just going to adjust it, and so it's normal, so that's why everything is colored in here. So I'm just going to change the mode to color blending, and now you can start to see that it's taking on the aspect of a skin color. I do have a particular one picked out, a particular color picked out for this, so I'm just going to type that in really quickly, and we're going to go with this, and then we're going to add a red layer, and again I'm just going to add an adjustment layer, solid color, and it's going to be a red version. Now we just added an adjustment layer without making a selection, so it just took the whole screen. So as you can see over here, right in the layers panel, the color is red, and all of the color is showing through on the entire image. That's because there's no mask applied. So what we want to do is we want to apply this layer to the previous layer. It's called a clipping mask. You can easily do that by holding down the Alt key, and as you move it across between the layers, you can see a down arrow. You click on that arrow once, and then the red layer now is attached to the brown layer, and it's taking on the characteristics of the clip of that layer, or the mask of that layer. So let's change the blending mode from normal, and let's go to soft light this time. As you can see, it's starting to get into a more fleshy kind of a tone, but we don't need all that red, so let's adjust the opacity, and we're going to take the opacity down. Let's take it down to about 40%, and there you go. That's yeah, again, you could play with this skin tone for a while. So let's go with this. We can always adjust it later. Okay. The thing we did do here that we need to correct is we colored the lips, the teeth, and the eyes. So let's take care of that first, and then we'll color the lips in with an actual red color. So go to your tool panel, select your brush. This time though, change the color from white to black, because black will take away the color from a layer mask. So select the layer mask on the lower level of the skin tone, which is kind of the tannish brown layer. Again, make sure that we have black as your primary color. You're in brush, and then just go over to the lips and paint the lips. And as you do that, you're actually removing the skin tone color that we originally put in. So just do that, and again, anything you do can easily be corrected at a later time. If you notice that you either left some color or it didn't color enough, you can always adjust that. So while I'm here, I'm going to just take away the color from the eyebrows also. And the eyes. So these are set up to receive color. So let's go right back down to colorizing the lips. Always when you're creating a selection, always start from the base layer. So I'm going to click on our base layer, go back to the quick selection tool, and I'm going to see what we can do with the lips. So I'm just going to use the quick selection tool again, and you don't have to do the entire selection in one shot. As long as you get the majority of it so you can get an idea of the color, then you should be fine. So I made my selection. I'm going to select an adjustment layer, solid color. It's going to be some aspect of red, so let's just get in there with a red. Change normal to color, and now we can see exactly where we missed when we did the initial selection. So I'm going to the layer we just created, clicking on the mask, making sure that the brush tool is selected with white because we're going to color. So I'm just going to color in the areas that we missed on the initial selection. After we do that, I'm going to switch from my color from white to black so that we can remove the red from the teeth. So I'm going to erase the color from the teeth, and I'm just going to leave a little red in the center of the teeth, so to kind of simulate the gums a little bit. So we're going to take that away. The color may not be the best here. It's a little bright, so why don't we adjust the color? I actually have a color selected that we can use that might be more appropriate. I'll use that red, but it's still a little bit bright, so I'm just going to tone it down a bit and maybe change the opacity to about, let's see, why don't we do about 40%? So that should work. I'll just zoom out. So that's what we're looking at right now. You know, skin and lips all done. Why don't we move right to doing the teeth? Again, we're going to do a quick selection over here on the teeth. Add an adjustment layer, solid color. It's going to be white. And we're going to change the blending mode this time to soft light. And just color in the teeth again using the same technique. Select the brush tool, make sure it's painting with white, and we'll quickly paint the teeth. Again, I'm moving a little bit quickly because we have a lot to cover, especially the next step, which is going to be the hair, which is going to require a little bit of a challenge to get it right. That's what the teeth look like. They might be a little bright, so I'm just actually going to take a little bit of the opacity down. So why don't we make it about 78, 79? So that looks okay. All right. So next step is the hair. Now the challenge with the hair is that there are areas that need to have the background show through with the hair. These straggling hairs that are just a little bit off of her head, we want to highlight them in color as best we can, but we also need the background to shine through. So we're going to have to use a little bit of a different technique, a little advanced technique that's available when we use the quick selection tool. So let's start out by doing the same techniques that we did earlier with selection. I'm going to make sure that I'm on the base layer, select the quick selection tool, and I'm going to select as best I can the hair. So I'm just going to be using the Alt key to add and subtract my selection. Again, because this isn't the highest quality image, so it's having a little bit of trouble finding the absolute edges, but let's see what we can do. In this particular case, since we have a lot of these hairs that are kind of, I'll say, wild or off her head, we're going to have to select them and then try to do something to reduce or try to isolate those hairs. So let's take a look at it in the quick selection tool. That's my selection, and if I did it right now, it probably wouldn't look very good because we're not isolating the hairs here or here or here, and it just wouldn't look that good. However, if we look at the top, there's a button that says Refine Edge. If you click on that, a window comes up where we can actually try to use a technique to isolate some of those hairs. So the first thing I'm going to do is just change the radius a little bit. I'm going to move it out to about 3 pixels. And then it's very simply done. I'm going to stroke the edges of the hair. And what it's doing is actually trying to find some of the edges for me to isolate the hair. Now, you're not going to be perfect here. So if you have some that aren't colorized, believe me, it won't matter too much in the final image, because those hairs will appear kind of colorized even though there's no color on them, and you'll see what I mean when I do that later. So I'm just like I said, just moving moving along the edge of her hair, and as you can see, Photoshop is trying to find the edges of these stray hairs. So I don't want to go too crazy on this because we don't want to isolate too much. We could always clean up a little bit later. So why don't I just show you what it looks like using a simulation for the quick mask. And as you can see over here on the right, on the top, and on the left, you can actually see the background coming through, and that's kind of what we want. So I'm just going to make that selection. So now we have our selection. We can do what we did earlier, just create an adjustment layer, solid color. Her hair was blondish, so we're going to go sort of in that color range. I'm going to hit OK, change the blending mode to color, and there you go. That's a color to start out with, but we're definitely going to adjust it. It's a little too yellow as opposed to blonde. So why don't we just change that color to something that's more appropriate, and then we'll do a little bit of a cleanup. So why don't we go with that color, and maybe still a little too yellow. So let's tone it down just a little bit. Why don't we take about 60%? That looks much better. So now why don't we clean up the hair a little bit? Again, go into the layer that we just created. Click on the mask of that. I'm just going to zoom in so we can get a better look. Select the brush tool. Make sure that you're painting with white, because we want to touch up some of these areas. For instance, right over here on the side, over here, we're going to just paint around there. And again, I'm just moving quickly here. When you do your own project, you could probably take a little bit more time on this. But as I mentioned earlier, even though we didn't color some of these stray hairs, they still look fine. And the nice thing about it is you can see the background layer or the background of the barn through her hair, which is a good look. While we're here, we might as well do the eyebrows, and we're going to use the hair color, but maybe just about 60% of the hair color. So I'm just going to change the opacity of the brush, not the layer. I'm just going to change the opacity of the brush down to 60 and paint that in. And again, we could do some cleanup on this a little bit later, but just to get a feel for where we are with the face of Marilyn, I think we're doing okay here. There is a little cleanup we should do right here. It looks like we have some skin tone that's where the hair color should be. So I'm just going to go into the skin layer and erase the skin tone and add in the hair color. So as you can see, pretty quickly and easily done. And again, I'm moving along a little bit quickly because it's a tutorial, but there you go. It looks fairly good at this point. Just one more step on the face that'll make it a little more realistic. What I'm going to do is add a little blush. What I'm going to do is around the nose, around the cheeks, the chin, and just under the eyes, we're going to put a little splash of color, maybe even on the ears. So how do we do that? I'm just going to add another layer on the skin layer. Now remember, we had if you look at the layers panel here, we had a brown layer followed by a red layer. And now we're going to add another red layer to simulate blush. So I'm just going to pick a red, a kind of a muted red. And again, when you create a layer without a selection, it shows the entire color, in this case, through. So we have to do a couple of things here. Number one, we want to create a clipping mask. In other words, have this red layer attached to the red layer of the skin layer. So again, we did that earlier with holding down the Alt key, arrow comes up, click, and now that red layer takes on the characteristics of the skin layer. We'll go over to the actual layer mask and hit Control I so none of the color shows through. And the reason why we did that is because we only want a little bit of that color to come through. So let's actually put in what the color should be here for the blush, and we're going to use this color right here. Hit OK, and we're going to click on the layer mask that's black, and we're going to change the opacity of the brush down to 10% because we only want a little bit of the color to come through. So let's make that 10%. And grab your brush, make sure it's white, so we're coloring with white, and just paint over her cheek very slightly and over her nose. And again, it's a little tough to see, but the color is coming through. And we'll do her other cheek. Again, it doesn't look like much is happening, but there actually is some color going in there. So the more you paint, the more color comes through. That's why it's good to use a lower percentage so that you can actually see it start to build up. So again, you can start seeing it's kind of we're looking for something very, very soft, very, very slight. Maybe for the chin, we will just increase it a little bit. Maybe 16% is good. So we're going to add a little color in the chin, and then just below the eyes, we're going to give it a couple of swipes here with the color. Again, very, very subtle. Even the ears, just a little subtlety on the ears. Okay, so I'm just going to hide the layer that we just did just for a second, and that's the layer without the blush layer, and that's with the blush layer. Again, it's very subtle, but sometimes subtle works. So the last colorization on this photo we're going to do is the background or the barn. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select a part of the photo just to get a color, and then we're going to use a technique to help us out with the actual colorization. So I selected an area. I'm going to create an adjustment layer, and in the case of a barn, you probably want to use some variation of a brown or a red or something, or a dark red. So why don't we go with so kind of like a brownish color, and we'll go with that. We'll hit OK. I'll change the blending mode to soft light, and so that's the brown we're going to use. Now we're going to run into the same problem with the barn that we ran in with the hair. We need to have the barn color show through her hair. So rather than going through that whole selection technique, we can actually use what we've done previously with the hair to help us out. And so how do we do that? So if you hold down the Control and Shift key and click on the hair mask, Photoshop will highlight that selection. So I basically highlighted the selection of the hair, and while we're at it, I'm going to hit Control Shift again and click on the layer mask for the sweater. And the reason why I did that is because, as you can see, the sweater and the hair basically are the outline around where we're going to put the color for the barn. However, we've just selected those particular colors. In other words, we've just selected an area of the hair and the sweater, but we actually want the opposite of that. We want to color the areas other than the sweater and the hair. So what you do is, while you have this selection made, go up to your selection, drop down, hit inverse. Even though it doesn't look like anything really changed here, we actually flipped the selection from everything is being but the hair and the sweater are being selected. So what we could do is go into the layer we just created, select the paintbrush tool, and now we can actually paint around the edges without any fear that we're going to blend in with the hair or the sweater color. So that action that we took earlier to separate the hair is actually helping us out here again. Alright, so as we color close to the hair, we have no fear that we're going to overwrite the hair. So I'm just going to hit select and deselect, and now you can see that we pretty much are done with this colorization. So what I'd like to do is just bring up the original, and we can take a look at it side by side here. So here's what the original image looked like, and I'm just going to show you side by side. So here's the original on the right and the colored image on the left, and again, a lot of touch-up work was done at the beginning, and you can see how helpful it was. Other than that, it was just a normal colorization using adjustment layers with a trick of showing you how to kind of separate the hair a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link to the Elizabeth Taylor tutorial also here on this one. So if you want to take a look at that one, where we didn't have to do as much touching up, and this one we did a significant amount of touching up before we did the colorization. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any comments, please let me know. Okay, thanks.